Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the District of Metchosin Committee of the Whole meeting. It's November 10th, and I'll just start this evening with the territorial acknowledgement. We are living here, and the District of Metchosin is on the territories of the Coast Salish people. I think particularly tonight about our near neighbors, the Shaanu Nation. We're going to look later in the agenda at our draft Parks and Trails Master Plan, and I'm reminded of the generosity of the Shaanu people who made a decision some years back now under the land swap to transfer sections 95, 28, and 25 to the District of Metchosin on completion of their treaty. And I'm thankful for that. So we'll start tonight with the agenda approval. Are there any changes to the agenda, amendments? Would someone like to move adoption? Councillor Shukin, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. There are no presentations tonight. I'd like to welcome people who are here tonight. If anyone would like to come up and speak to us in public participation. I have 4 minutes. And we'd love to hear from you. If you could say your name and your street, please.
Sandra Lamb, Hackamore Drive. Upon review of this draft of the Parks and Trails Master Plan, respectfully, I would like to comment on how I find a huge disconnect between what is laid out in this document and Metchosin's official community plan, which maintains a commitment to rural values and protection of the natural environment. It appears members of the Parks and Trails Committee wish to actively pursue undeveloped land for the development of trails, parks, and residential homes. They even suggest a rezoning as a way to achieve this, page 85. To point out a clear example of the disconnect and myopic disregard for environment, pages 42, 47, 58, and 62 list Metchosin Mountain as a high priority for trails and residential development, while a small paragraph on page 62 identifies that sensitive ecosystems should be identified. There is no mention that that was done on Metchosin Mountain or even recommended to do so there before any such designation of high priority was given. Does this committee know how many old-growth Douglas firs are on that mountain? Does this committee know which tree cavity the endangered western screech owl makes its home? It appears Parks and Trails are out of touch with current knowledge and the expectations to preserve land in its natural state for the benefit of us now and generations to follow. Please look up and read about the National Wildlife Corridors Plan, funded by the federal government, the Provincial Sensitive Ecosystem Inventory Project. Without commitment to value the remaining wild spaces left in Metchosin as entities worth preserving, we'll evolve into a community just like all the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak?
Tara Fenwick on Gilbert Drive, Metchosin. I am a director and secretary for the Metchosin Foundation. I'm here to present an information bulletin developed by the Metchosin Foundation in consultation with the BC Parks Foundation. We understand that a concern was expressed by a district delegation that local taxpayers' awareness of the scope of BCPF's investment in local conservation and of its partnership with the Metchosin Foundation may be limited. This information bulletin is an attempt to address that gap in communication. The Metchosin Foundation works in partnership with other agencies. Since 2023, we have been grateful to work in collaboration with the BC Parks Foundation. In 2025, our respective agencies entered into a written bilateral agreement BCPF is not a service organization. BCPF operates as a province-wide funding partner, collaborating with many local governments and smaller agencies, such as our own. A necessary condition for BCPF to invest its donors' capital with a given BC region, such as Metchosin, is local government policy support. The most basic form of policy support is an enduring waiver of all property taxes on land acquired for park-related purposes. Monetary benefits to Metchosin are great. Since 2023, BCPF has invested over $3 million in Metchosin land, acquiring 32 forested acres notable for freshwater habitat and 51 forested acres notable for migratory bird habitat. In support of these acquisitions, the Metchosin Foundation has contributed hundreds of volunteer hours and over $70,000 in grants ourselves through our own donors' generosity. Per capita investment to date for the benefit of all Metchosin residents has been over $600 per person based on the 2021 census. Properties thus acquired by BCPF support the environmental dimension of the district's strategic plan, and importantly, help sustain our community's forest cover, groundwater, climate resiliency, and biodiversity. Annual cost to Metchosin's property taxpayers, based on CFO Creek's September 15th, 2025 report for Council, the District of Metchosin's attributed share of BCPF's permissive property tax exemption that would be payable by the owners of a typical local property would be under $2 a year. The share of BCPF's permissive property tax exemption attributed to other taxable authorities and payable by the owners of an average local property would be just over $3 per year. Since BCPF's conservation and park properties do not create incremental demand for regional amenities such as schools, hospitals, or recreational facilities, they should not be assessed a corresponding property tax levy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eva Dillon, 4045 Saddleback Road. I did read the draft Parks and Trails Master Plan, and there's a lot of really, really good information, great information in there. And I realize it's a compilation of other plans that have come before it. And I know that our neighborhood group has been advocating a lot for park space in our area. And I do see that there's a section where those, I think they're calling them now linear parks, which were part of the subdivision when it was first developed 30 some odd years ago, are not recommended for trails at this time. And it just raised more questions in my mind, because a lot of the rationale for why the neighbors have been advocating for the protection of this park space and to keep it in its natural state really wasn't noted in the draft. It just says lack of support by neighbors for trails. And then in the comments, there are a lot of the backup comments that we made about protecting the natural spaces. But then the line that really bothers me is going on to say the status of these lands should be reevaluated should any significant changes occur to the current situation. So to me, that just raises a question. Okay, what does that mean exactly? And what is the current situation that they're referring to in the draft? And who is making that decision? The other part that significantly concerns me is the mention of priority of Mount Metchosin as high priority trail development opportunities. And then the backup says Mount Metchosin, this area is privately owned, a part of the Olympic View Golf Course property. While there's existing informal trail network in the area, this property also has the potential for future residential development. This larger parcel is notable as it covers both Colwood and Langford in addition to Metchosin. Development proposals have been approved in both Colwood and Langford. So what does that mean now, and how does that refer to Metchosin? Does that mean that Metchosin should be approaching the owners of Olympic View and saying, we're prime for development, you know, can we have some park space? And then my next question would be, at what cost? So does that mean we're somehow exchanging development for additional park space? So like I say, there's a lot of good stuff in the plan, but there's also lots of questions, and I guess my concern is who's providing the answers to these questions. It's great we're having open houses and things, but you know, who's answering those questions and who's making the decisions about things like acquisition of land in Metchosin. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? I think we're good then. So we'll carry on with our meeting. And there'll be an opportunity after we talk, I think, for questions if people would like to ask anything at that point. So committee, we've got adoption of minutes of the first minutes up are the June 5th, 2025 Special Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Councillor Schuben, and seconded by Mayor Little. Any comments or questions? We'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. The next minutes we have are from the Committee of the Whole, October 20th. Moved adoption from Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Councillor Schuken. All in favor? Approved. Thank you. And then we've got receipt of advisory select committee minutes, October 15th of the Agricultural Advisory Select Committee. Take them maybe all at once. October 21st of the PTASC minutes, that's the Parks and Trails Advisory Select Committee. And then October 28th to 2025, the Metchosin Environmental Advisory Select Committee minutes.
Yeah, maybe we could take them one at a time.
Would you like to speak to one of them?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we'll start off with October 15th, 2025, Agricultural Advisory Select Committee minutes. Would anybody like to move receipt? Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Seconded by Mayor Little. And would you like to discuss these or have a question about the minutes?
Just really quickly, I just want to thank Councillor Donaldson and the committee for some good insights into the housing question. So that did actually influence my views on what we're moving forward. So,
any other comments or questions? So we'll call the question. All in favor? Those minutes are received. The October 21st, 2025 Parks and Trails Advisory Select Committee. Thank you, Councillor Schuken. Seconded by Councillor Donaldson. Any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Approved. Thank you. Then the October 28, 2025, the Metchosin Environmental Advisory Select Committee minutes. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Seconded by Councillor Schuken. Thank you. And discussion?
Yeah, we've got some editing. So are these the final minutes? On page 21, there's some crossed out information. Are these not the final, or?
They'll go back to the committee for approval, so they're in draft at the moment.
Okay. And then also, I note that you had a discussion about the permissive tax exemptions. Who led that discussion?
The question was really raised about, do people know what had happened? And they did know, so everyone was aware of it. The permissive tax exemption idea came from the committee, and so it's a question of being sure people knew that the council had made some decisions on that.
And who led that discussion?
We really didn't spend a lot of time on it. I think the question was that this had occurred at council, and that was pretty much it.
Okay, I was just wondering because the chair was absent, so, okay, thank you.
call the question. All in favor? Approved. Thank you. Approved receipt. Thank you. So the first item of meaty business is Councillor Shukin, your councillor's update. Do you want to lead off?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I am very pleased on behalf of the Parks and Trails Advisory Committee to bring you the first draft of the Parks and Trails Master Plan. I just want to acknowledge that one of the members, Carolyn Donahue, is in the audience tonight and was obviously a very instrumental part of bringing this forward, and is going to also be very important in terms of the mapping work that's going to be coming along as well. So just to mention the other members of the Parks and Trails Advisory Committee, so Ron Aubry, Jim Nan, Karen Hoffman, David Shanks, and Kathy Atherton, and I think that's everybody. Pretty sure that's everybody. So this was very much a team effort and entirely volunteer. Like I mentioned at one of the earlier meetings, I think we have to date spent $80, and that was to buy cookies for the first open house. So if I could, maybe just do a quick overview of the plan, and if you don't mind, maybe I'll address some of the comments that were raised earlier. But the first question that might come to mind is, why do a Parks and Trails Master Plan? And part of the answer comes from the simple mathematics of adding up how much parkland we have. The current parks inventory that we have equates to about 249 acres. If we're to add the bufferland in time and then section 95 in time, that brings in another 213 acres of district managed parkland. With that, we have 51 trails. Some of them are longer, some of them are very short, but all told, it's about 20 kilometers of trails, all told. So again, call them natural assets if you want, but we have significant parks and trails, significant parks and trails assets in Metchosin. So the draft plan, the goal of the draft plan is to understand how to best manage our current assets, to incorporate community interests and aspirations for our parks and trails, to identify new projects and opportunities, and also to go back and look at how we have dealt with some of the some of the opportunities that were identified in 2009 and 1986. So that's in there as well, a reflection on those projects. And also a big one too is to identify issues and risks that could impact our parks and trails. And that's been an interesting one to do. And I think if you go back to 2009 or 1986, the significance of some of the risks we're facing are quite different, and maybe hard to say if they were unforeseen back then. I'll cover those in just a minute or so. But in terms of process and how we got here, there was an approval by council to develop the master plan in January 2025. We set off in doing some initial writing, but then held an open house in April. We've got this current draft, and there is another open house that is planned for November 22nd. Once we complete that open house, we'll go back, factor in that public input, and do a new draft. And ideally, that will come to council for a close review in January and February, and we'll look at whether we can move to some sort of approval. And ideally, at that point, too, we're going to have a mapping package and also again an inventory or specific parks and trails information sheets on each of our assets. And again, there's 51 trails, 5 parks. So just in terms of going through the master plan, there's an introduction, there's a community profile, there's the process that we went through, there's a look at trends. Then we have a section for trails, parks, and beaches. And then in this draft, we've summarized a what we've heard section. And I just want to go through very quickly some of the trends and planning considerations we looked at were accessibility. And I think this is something that likely would not have come up in 2009 and way back in the good old days of 1986. And so that can be everything from, there's a recommendation to explore new accessibility for beaches, new parking stalls, potential of benches on some of the trails as well. Regional growth and anticipated impacts, I think that's top of mind for many of us here. District resourcing, and with that our volunteer base as well. The risk of invasive plants seems to be growing and looming every day, every week, it seems. The impacts of new technology like e-bikes, that might have relevance in terms of the growth of roadside trails, but also some risks to our own internal trails in terms of being able to bring bikes to places where they haven't been before. And then biking as well, and there are recommendations around that. So just very quickly, each section concludes with a set of recommendations, and these are brought forward here, and it'd be great to have some initial discussion. One of the, I'll wrap things up here with 2 points, but one of the things that we are looking for in terms of input, answers to simple questions. What have we missed? Are there new parks and trails opportunities that you want the district to explore? What are the specific locations, if so? For example, one of the things we heard is an interest in connecting more to the Galloping Goose. So where exactly would those connection points be? Do you agree with what's in the plan? Do you disagree with what's in the plan? Do you have concerns about how parks and trails are being managed? And how can those concerns be addressed? What else should the district be aware of and be planning for? And did we identify the key risks and issues in our parks and trails? Are there others? So those are some of the questions that we've asked, and will be, this is going to be posted on the website. Of course, it's in the agenda now, but we do have a section on the PTask page. So this will be posted there. And of course, we're doing the open house on the 22nd. So I'll wrap up there for one sec, but I did want to address the comments that were made earlier. And thank you for pointing out the sections, but one of the things I have to respectfully push back against is there is no recommendation in the plan for residential development. This is what, if anything, and its mention is simply the mere potential of residential development, particularly on Metchosin Mountain. It is privately owned, and I'm struggling now to think about what it is zoned as, but it has been developed on the Colwood and Langford side, or proposed for development, and we may have to anticipate that there may be a future request coming to us. So in terms of, if there's a mention of residential development, it is certainly not to advocate for that. It is to mention the potential of that. So if there is, that is something we have to address in terms of the potential of parks and trails up there as well. So, and again, I don't know how to talk about being out of touch. One of the things that I think we're very much in touch, and especially with the neighbors in the Saddleback, Highmount, Hackamore area, because we did make a recommendation that, based on what we've heard from neighbors and their commitment to maintaining the areas of linear parks, managing the broom and keeping, identifying any neighbor encroachments, we did say we would not look at developing trails further. We would keep them in their natural state. So I think that's very clear in the plan. And again, I do recognize, maybe we didn't go into depth in terms of the number of times the neighbors in that area have pushed back against the idea of trails. I should point out, this is a really long document. It's almost 80 pages, so we weren't able to get absolutely everything. So I think that this is a very strong voice of advocacy for maintaining rural Metchosin and also for enhancing biodiversity values. So, but also coinciding with the fact that many of the properties not all, but many of the properties that we're talking about are publicly owned. And we do have to always keep that in mind as well. So Councillor Gray, like, I don't know how you want to do this. If folks have general comments or more specific comments, I'm certainly happy to hear them. And I don't know if we want to just trip through each section briefly. We don't need to spend hours on this by any means, but.
Yeah, when asked just before we began, I wondered about just providing some general comments, and thank you for providing us at council with a Word document that people can look at and work at. There's the opportunity for the open house coming, and as you say, putting it up on the web so the community's got the chance to provide input. And will they email it to certain individuals, or how's that organized, that part of it?
So we've asked people to email just info@metchosin.ca and put Parks and Trails in as well.
Perfect, okay. Thank you. So I was imagining some general comments and then if people want to look at specific topics, but if it feels like we should go through the document, I'm open to that as well. Councillor Donaldson, Mayor Little? Councillor Donaldson?
Yes, thank you. I have some typo stuff that I don't wish to discuss here that I can just send to you because I don't want to take up valuable time, and definitely appreciate all the time that Parks and Trails volunteers have put into this, bringing it forward from the previous master plan that we have. It was time to look at that because our priorities have changed the way we navigate Metchosin, whether it's roadside trails, natural spaces, natural trails, all those things, and also leaving an opportunity to not have a crystal ball, but an option for future councils and volunteers to work on this as a plan without what's the word? Being tied into something very concrete. It still leaves a lot of flow for conversation with residents, with our neighboring communities as well. As an example, with the comment that was made with Metchosin Mountain potential development, if we were to look at this even a little bit more, we've also noticed that there's comments of having collaboration with Colwood on the Duke Road, Metchosin Road area where Far Hill, crosswalks, that sort of stuff. The cost of collaborating would be more advantageous than us taking on all the cost ourselves, just because the different communities and the usages, whether there's a parking lot, that sort of stuff. Those are things that kind of popped up to me. So when I hear about concerns from neighbors with potential development on Olympic View property, which we've heard about for years, again, there could be an opportunity for us to have a collaboration with that organization, and similarly with the bufferlands, maybe they would plan with the buffer area there of green space between their development and our border, that sort of stuff. Just as good neighbors, everybody would benefit more in that regards, as opposed to having high rises looking down on our rural neighborhood or whatever. So leaving those options open, I think, has value to it. In regards to things like accessibility, we've talked about it briefly before. Not going with like paved and concrete surfaces, but maybe harder surfaces like screenings that do pack. That sort of thing probably is more doable or acceptable for roadside trails and that sort of thing. So those kinds of comments, I'd like to be able to jot some things down, maybe send it to you, and PTAS could consider those sorts of things. Same with benches inside a forest canopy. Current benches wouldn't last very long, so maybe a different material, that sort of stuff. So yeah, lots of great work, lots of things to think about. And, I'll send you some of the typos and those sorts of things too. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Shukin. Mayor Little?
Yeah, thank you. And Councillor Shukin, congratulations to the Parks and Trails. This is a really wonderful first draft of the Parks and Trails master plan. As you know, a number of other plans that we've done in this term anyways have been contracted to consultants at $40,000 or more. So paying for cookies is nothing compared to what we've had to pay for other plans. So on behalf of myself, I would like to say thank you to the volunteers of the Parks and Trails Committee. I think at some point we'll need to have some kind of a conversation regarding the unmanaged parks. On page 35, you talk about the unmanaged parks in Graceland, Highmount, Kasani, Sea Spray, Windover, and I think at some point we'll need to know like what is council's will, what does the community want to do with them, because as we've seen in some of them is they're taken up by neighbors in terms of residency or occupying, even though it's not their park. It's for the neighborhood, but it's also an asset. It's a natural asset of all of Metchosin. So I think we'll need to have a conversation about those going forward, and we may be able to leverage if we decide to sell those pieces, perhaps to the neighboring landowners, leverage that for additional parks acquisition. I also I like the recommendations regarding e-bikes. A lot of our trails, like the Buckbrush Swamp Trail, it goes up and over and around trees and over their roots, and they're not really designed for mountain bikes or e-bikes. So I like the whole sort of the ethos regarding bikes. Certainly the Galloping Goose Trail and perhaps some of the other trails that we have, but not on some of the more sensitive. And I wouldn't like to see the bikes in the buffer lands, for instance. I like the idea of an official trail stewardship program. As you mentioned in here, I think you did, was that there has been in the past a program, and I think that can be expanded. I know there are sort of unofficial trail stewards throughout Metchosin that are thankfully looking after the trails nearby them, and I think that would be a great opportunity for volunteerism in the community. Let's see what else. One, it's not a criticism, it's just when I was reading through it, it very much takes snapshots in time. And I think some of the statements, like when we're talking about trail standards, you could say, these are standards that are set over the next 10 or 20 years, or growth opportunities for trail network. Leading sentences like looking into the future, so that this is not a plan only for today, but a plan for 10 and 20 years out. And I think you have it there. It's just that those kind of statements aren't in there. Forward thinking in terms of management. How are we going to manage these for the future? And absolutely. In 6.4, we talk about bathrooms and other amenities. Last term, we met with the CRD. I was the Parks and Trails liaison. We did meet with CRD regarding their experience with washrooms and how much it costs. It's completely cost prohibitive for Metchosin unless we run into a great deal of money. It would be a nice amenity to provide, but it just is so terribly expensive. And I have some other comments that I'll forward that are just sort of minor housekeeping in nature. So again, thank you and congratulations.
Okay.
Councillor Shippen.
Thanks very much, Mayor Little. And just responding to a few comments. Yeah, I think the Trail Steward program would be really great to get up and running. And it was great to have Mr. Payette at one of our most recent PTASC meetings, and we began to talk a little bit more about how we can do that. So we are on the verge of being able to take the next step to get that set up. And our Trails coordinator is very keen to do that. And actually one of our retiring members is also very keen to be a Trail Steward. So in fact, he well, he is one of the unofficial for sure. Yeah. So, and yeah, and the comment on bathrooms, I mean, it sounds really cold and heartless in a way to say we're going to continue with no bathrooms, no garbages. But again, just as your point, it is cost prohibitive. And even when we were, we had set up the receptacle to accept dog poop bags. I forget which, it was Weir Beach or Taylor Beach. We learned that the potential cost of managing that effectively was something in the order of $25,000. So that thinking in terms of cost limitations, that influenced much of the thinking that in the line. So, yeah. Thank you.
Great. I had a few comments. I mean, basically, I really like the comprehensive approach. You've done a whole sweep of the entire question of parks and trails, and that's impressive. And I want to say thanks to the committee and the volunteers, and recognize Carolyn, who's here tonight. Thank you. You know, this is, as the document points out, a huge amount of this effort is done by volunteers. The staff are important as well, but it's a really big part of Metchosin. I'll just reflect on the words that Sandra Lamb offered at the beginning about, you know, the environment and the thinking about the OCP and that. And I'm wondering if that may be, I'm not sure if there's a disagreement. I think it might be just a framing issue and how some of the issues are presented. As you say, some land is zoned for subdivision at the moment. And I took the comments in the document as to reflect that and say this land is zoned in that way. And so if there were to be development of the land, then we'd pay attention to the trails and that. But if there's a larger disagreement, we should identify it and sort it through, because it is important to consider our a deep regard for the environment and the ecosystems, the sensitive ecosystems, and the tree canopy. But I saw the document as celebrating those things, but I can hear others read something different. So working on that tone or the framing would be maybe a good idea. I had a couple of really general comments about maybe add some timelines for some of the tasks. So there was something about opportunities for land donations and some work to be done. The district volunteer policy, I'm not really clear what that is, but it sounds like we should get that done fairly soon. And so that would be one that's probably worth putting a timeline on it. These maybe, some of them might be aspirational, but for the committee to let us know what they're thinking in terms of when we should complete. I also thought that there might be a few places where we could identify, it may not be that PTAS group that's going to be doing something, but maybe it's something the planner needs to do, or do we need our engineer to look at something? So it's a bit of clarity on some of the actions on if there are or is someone to tag for them to let us know. The other, it's a real general comment, but I thought it might be worthwhile pulling some of the recommendations out of the plan, get decisions on them, and then put them back in again. And so for that, I will take the example of bikes. So I think in here we talk about the district, you know, considering bike restrictions. Maybe, and then I think PTAS has actually laid out and said this is our view of what the bike restrictions should be. So perhaps we could look at those and confirm them or not, or discuss them, get a decision so the plan actually reflects a decision. Another example, I mean, there's more examples perhaps, but the commercial dog walking licensing or banning them in certain locations. Maybe we get some decisions on that, so the plan reflected the view of council and the community, and get them done rather than looking forward and say, well, we'll deal with it at some future time, because I think you've done the work, and so we may as well frame them as in decisions being made, or it looks to me that way. The committee can respond, of course, and maybe I don't have it right, but I'm just imagining that. The recommendations on subdivisions I thought were a bit weak, and I don't mean that as a criticism of the committee, but rather I think when we had that subdivision seminar, we learned from the person who gave us all the background that a plan like this is meaningless, it seems, when it comes to subdivision. We need to actually make changes in our bylaws So whether it's the subdivision bylaw or the land use bylaw. But I think it would be unfortunate to leave some of the recommendations in this plan and not get them into the law. Otherwise, we're in a situation where the approving officer is left again with discretion, saying, well, maybe I don't really want to get that land donation, or it's a little bit more difficult to do that, or the developer is not as interested. But the approving officer has the power to do it. But the question is, does this council want to give direction in a bylaw about what's to be done? Or do we just want ideas expressed by a committee that may or may not end up anywhere? So just the idea of, if the committee could look at that question and say, hey, here's a few things that we should put in our law so that we make sure we do them, that would be helpful, I think. The planning with Colwood and Langford that Councillor Donaldson mentioned, I think, is important, and advice on timing would be good. Maybe it's yesterday, but if it's something that they think we should get on to sooner than later, that would be good to know. I had a few other comments, but I think the big, perhaps, overarching all of it is that volunteers, the effort that volunteers put in, and the stewardship program that talking about, but also PTask. And I saw a little bit in the document, I think, seeking clarity on, the budgets and how much money is available to do things, and setting up plans and being regimented like that makes sense to me. So those are a few thoughts that I had tonight, and I think I'm bouncing off a few of the ideas from the mayor and from the Councillor Donaldson, but Mayor Little.
Also, I forgot to mention that in the equestrian use section, it would be great if you could mention the mounting blocks. The original mounting blocks were designed and produced by Mark Atherton, former chair of the PTask, and that was on the Hillman Trail in 2 places. And then I think there's a rock at the Happy Valley Rocky Point site, meant to be a mounting block, but I think that would be great to put in here, because it shows how much we value parks and trails for equestrian use. And as you said, there has always been one position on the Parks and Trails Committee for an equestrian, to advocate for equestrians there. Regarding the recommendations, I think it'd be great at the end to have a final list of all of the recommendations. I know that's going to be pages, but just a final list subdivided by section as you have it here, I think would be very much appreciated, in addition to them being embedded in the document. Thank you.
Yeah, great. And that was something I was ambitious to do, is list all the recommendations. And I think it'd be great for us to go back and try and do that and see if we can do it without adding too many more pages. One comment about the equestrians, as I understand it, Councillor Johnson probably knows this better than anybody, but they were the biggest impetus and the driver for so many of the trails and the history of trail development in Metchosin. So that was a very small section, but it was meant to acknowledge like the roots of our trail network. So yeah, just a few comments on your comments, Councillor Gray. Thanks, good points. Ideally it would be good to get clarity and decisions and decisiveness on some of these things. It really is about the time and what our priorities are. But again, it is a good point, and especially something like bikes, where in some cases it's going to be signs, or I don't know where it fits into bylaw. That might be one that's an easier win, but still signs take time to get up. The recommendation on subdivision and putting that in a bylaw, I might ask for some help with that one. What I would like to request is that the advisory committees also get a copy of this, and I'll connect with Councillor Rep to make sure that Healthy Communities gets one as well. I think the chair is in the room, so that's helpful. But it would be great to get comments from the advisory committees, but also, I think you raise a good point, Councillor Gray, where can we act fairly decisively, fairly quickly? And that, in many ways, is a team thing. in terms of subdivision, that has a deeper impact in terms of biodiversity and conservation and all that. So it is something that's shared amongst a few different groups. So, but thank you
For
very much
sure.
for the comments.
Yeah, just ideas to bounce them off and see what,
Mhm.
what might work, and maybe some don't make sense, but I thought
Yeah.
to mention them
Yeah.
in a general read. So I've sent off today to the Environmental Advisory Subcommittee, and we'll talk about it at our next meeting, and I hope others might do that as well.
And one thing I did say in my briefing that I'd appreciate comments by December 8th, but I know with the advisory committees, that's going to take longer. So in January at some point, that would be great. So, but thank you very much, and I very much appreciate you spending the time. It was surprising how many pages this ended up, and but I think it's useful, or will be useful in time. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So maybe we'll move to our next agenda item then, and that's Councillor Donaldson, Councillor's update.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Top of my report is tomorrow is Remembrance Day. Everyone knows about that. And the announcements have all gone out, but in case people aren't sure of how things will play out, if they want to participate into the march, we will gather behind the fire hall and muster up about 10:30. The chief usually has somebody there that gets us in line according to the appropriate etiquette. So one of the volunteers will help with that generally. Then we'll start off with the march, but we will be following 3 pipers this year. They will lead us to the cenotaph, and the ceremony will start at 11 a.m. sharp. I've had numerous people and organizations contact me over the last few weeks as to their involvement with this, and I've passed that on to my cohort, Mr. Tom Henry, who does the emceeing for this event. Once that is done, Mr. Henry will actually instruct everybody as they arrive where they stand. Generally, we start with the smallest to the tallest, so that children can have very much a frontal view of what's taking place, and there's a lot of experience and interest and learning to be had there. And then he will call people up in accordance to his itinerary that he has. There will be music and song and recitation from various individuals in the community. Then when we're finished, we will reassemble out onto the street to be able to march back. Speaking of the street, the roads will be closed off to traffic. Again, the fire department will do some traffic management for us, and the community is aware of those areas as it's been in the news and on the website. So we must be mindful of safety for everybody and adhere to the direction of our traffic control personnel. And we will be marching back to the fire hall, where we will have some refreshments served up by the local 14th Wanatuka Scout group. So that's tomorrow morning's events, and everyone is welcome to join in on the march. Those who choose to meet us at the cenotaph will do so as they have done in the past. So for agriculture, which is one of my main portfolios, the farmers market season has wrapped up for the year. They will have one more market, which will be the Christmas market, December 7th. It's a Sunday from 11 till 2 out in the market where it usually is. So come and stock up on some fresh farm goods and handmade gifts for the holidays. Having said that, there are several farms that are still open for business year round. So they're offering up fresh locally grown food, everything from produce to meats to eggs, jams, baked goods, all sorts of delectables. And so as you're planning for your family's winter menus, please take heart that shopping locally is of value to our community entrepreneurs and to our community as keeping local business here as well. West Shore Parks and Recreation continues to have fitness programming over at the school, and you'll see here the different days. I didn't put the times. The Seniors Resource Center actually posts those schedules, and you can also go to the West Shore Parks and Recreation activity online guide to sign up for those programs. They go month to month, and there's, with more interest, we'll see more activities happening. And that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Mayor Little?
Yeah, as council liaison, I think that it's also worth noting to members of the community that we have an open house on November 12th for the Metchosin Fire Hall feasibility study project. The architects will be there. Everybody's welcome to attend. It's from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. November 12th, Wednesday of this week. So everybody's welcome, and come with your questions. Thank you.
I had a question, Councillor Donaldson. I'm not sure if you know, maybe the CAO. Is the West Shore Parks and Rec now paying for their time in the school, or are we still in the trial period?
That is a question I don't have the information for, so Mr. Payette or Mr. Creek would have that.
If we can ask over to Mr. Payette.
Thanks. Through the chair, I believe there was a timeline for them to start paying. I don't know if we've met that timeline or not, but I can check.
Thank you. Great. Well, the next item on the agenda is a council update for myself, and I don't have a report for today. So we don't have any correspondence. We don't have any other business. Are there any questions from the audience? Looks like, oh, here we come.
Gary Lamb, Hackmore Drive. Question the Parks and Trails Committee. At this idea, do they have any idea of the costs and timing associated with their initial plan?
The costs will be based on the actual initiatives, and there are many, everything from potentially buying Moby mats to allow for access to the beach, to painting parking stalls, to putting benches in, to doing what it takes to make the bufferland a manageable park. So we haven't priced out those specific things yet, and they're likely to unfold over a period of years. So, but I will say though that, you know, in terms of benches, for example, we're not looking at a dozen benches. I would think it's more like in the order of 3 to 4. So overall, I think these are pretty manageable costs. Generally, anything PTASC has done has been below $40,000, but typically anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000. So in terms of timing, my hope would be is that we can have the master plan in one form or another, ideally approved by March. So
as you firm up some of your initiatives, presumably there will be more definitive costing and timing associated with them.
We'll do our best. Yeah, we'll do our best. Like, for example, the bufferland is something we have to tackle fairly quickly. But again, if we're trying to build greater accessibility, I think the benches would be something we'd want to take on. So I mean, it's a good point, Mr. Lamb. Yeah, we'll do our best. Yeah.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Little?
Yeah, so just in terms of costs, every year the Parks and Trails is given, I think it's 5 to 10 for operational and 10,000 for capital. For many, many years, they did not use that amount. It's not carried over, but if it was, it would probably be quite significant. Parks and Trails is a volunteer committee, and it's really bare bones. Many of the trails were developed with volunteers, and so that they are a low cost workforce actually, but also they don't spend a lot of money generally from year to year.
Maybe I'll just add the point too on the document. It describes special projects are approved by council, and then it's really the maintenance is done through the annual allocation to the committee. So, although not an overall cost here, we would see, or the council of the day would see whatever projects are coming and make decisions. The way I read it, would make decisions on an annual basis as to what's available, what would proceed and what wouldn't. Does that catch it?
I think that's a really good way of, characterizing it, and also kind of defining the road ahead in terms of cost. And one of the things, of course, is you might do a lot of work to frame up what it costs for benches, but they're bound to increase 5 years hence when you actually get around to being able to do them. So, yeah.
I suppose it points to one idea, which is maybe when the plan is completed to look at and lay out more or less what the priorities might be. So we have the accessibility mats to the beach. Is that a priority as compared to, another example is painting lines on the road for parking spots, sort of figuring out where the priorities are, and that might help us too in terms of looking forward. Not that the priorities couldn't change, but that what does the committee think we should start? And then some cost numbers could come from that possibly. Not seeing anybody else up for questions. I think that's it for the evening. I'll just remind people, November 11th, tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the Cenotaph is the Remembrance Day ceremony. The Fire Hall open house is on Wednesday from 4 to 8 p.m., November 12th. And then the Parks and Trails open house from 1 to 3 on Saturday, November 22nd, to look at the Parks and Trails plan and provide comment. And as Councillor Shukin said, totally open and looking for ideas and additional messages that should be looked at by the committee as they work away. Thanks so much for the work you've done. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Mayor Little and Councillor Donaldson, thank you. All in favor? Meeting's adjourned. That was interesting hearing Sandra Lamb right off the top.